and hope you're all seeing what Henry Kissinger.
Yep, at 100.
Yeah, at 100.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, Jane, the last 9 months or so, we've been talking a lot about China and what does China want. And we went back and we looked at the history of China-American relationship since World War II and how complicated it is. And this is just the most recent update. All right, so Kissinger went to Beijing and he met with the defense minister. You'll remember a couple of sessions ago that the Chinese defense minister refused to meet with Lloyd Austin. And that's because he is on the sanctions list that Trump put him on, right? I won't go through that again. We've covered that. And China simply wants him taken off the sanctions list, but we haven't done it. And so he won't meet with anybody except for Henry Kissinger. Okay, so this was a big story in last week's Economist, and it just got resolved this morning. It's almost like they wanted to get it resolved before we went on air. So I'm going to tell you the way it was initially reported, and then I'll give you this morning's latest installment. The foreign minister was missing for a month. Imagine what if Tony Blinken disappeared for a month. And there was gossip worthy of a bad romantic novel or a spy thriller. And the rumor mill in Beijing under Xi Jinping is especially active because he's so opaque. So you remember, we introduced you to Qin Gang, and he was presented as the bad cop in the bad cop good cop duo. He is the one that attacked America and in relationship to the Cuba kerfuffle. And it was about that time that their Air Force started buzzing our surveillance airplanes. And we scolded China, and he said, hey, you guys are mass spies all around the world. Give us a break. And he's kind of the tough guy. He's been called a wolf warrior. And he's probably because he's called in ambassadors in the middle of the night and berated them and talking about Chinese history going back 125 years. And what the West did to put down the Boxer Rebellion, and that we bullied China in the days of imperialism. And of course, he's right. And it's that 150 years of humiliation that is weighing heavily, as we talked about in previous session, weighing heavily on the current Chinese administration. Especially Xi's psychology, and we'll get into that in just a second. Now, the good cop is Wang Yi. We've talked about Wang a number of times, but he's the party's top diplomat. How can that be? How could he be China's top diplomat but not be the foreign minister? Well, it's because the party trumps everything. So you've got this dual system in parallel, but whenever there's two people in government, it's always the member from the party who is on top. And he has been playing the good cop. And he's the guy that's coming to San Francisco in November for a special Indo-Pacific summit. And he has suggested to Blinken that it would be nice for America to announce a change in policy in its respect with respect to China. And he's always been more cordial. Well, this is important given what happened this morning. So there's been suspense, nothing, no word for a month. He just disappeared. Was he sick? But China has a problem talking about members, important politicians being sick. They just don't do it. You've got to be vigorous. You've got to dye your hair black. There's no white hairs allowed. And even during COVID, no senior official ever admitted to going down with COVID. So this morning, China fired the foreign minister, made it clear he's been missing for a month because he's stepping down and he's being placed by Wang Yi. So the head of the party, the top diplomat in the party, is also going to take over being foreign minister, a dual role. And the significance of this is still unknown. It's a mystery because Qin Gang has been a confidant of Xi. He rose to the top quickly. And even though he was caustic and a wolf warrior, people thought he was doing that because that's what Xi wanted. Now, does this him going mean that China is going to take a more accommodating road? Who knows? Who knows? But this is job titles. You have to get used to it. Wherever there's a party person involved, it's always the party that's on top. I thought Homer would be here. He requested these. I'm going to skip over them for when Homer's here. I wanted to talk about this in the context of rule of law. So there's a new campaign in China to promote rule of law. But don't get confused. There's been no change in philosophy whatsoever. Xi Jinping is at the top. It's just that what he's been saying is now being made into law. That's all that means. The rule of law with Chinese characteristics. And not what we're thinking about, where you have a balance of power and checks and balances. And in fact, Xi has gone out of his way to denounce judicial independence and separation of powers as dangerous foreign ideas. So this is the way the Chinese government is organized. Communist Party is at the top. They control the military, the inspectors, discipline, and everything follows from that. As we know, their Congress is just a rubber stamp. It dutifully broke term limits to give Xi a third 5-year term. The judicial system is about as low as you can go in influence. And then there's this the state, the departments of state that administratively run the country. And these are the state councils, the government ministries, our cabinet, our departments, but it's under the Communist Party, And then there's these other consultative conferences and stuff, meaningless. This is it. Then rule of law is just to get to codify what she's been saying all the time, all along, because she has seized every lever of government that there is. Not only is he General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, he's also chairman of the military commission. He's also president, so he represents China globally. And he obviously controls all these other organs. So he's paramount. And so the rule of law is just to codify his political rhetoric. We have a latecomer here, so let's welcome Barbara. So it's just to codify his political rhetoric and establish legitimacy. So the government is really trying to appear legitimate. We talked last time about how they had hooked their wagon onto 5,000 years of Chinese history and culture. And they want to counter the idea that they're just ruling arbitrarily. And the problem, too, has been corruption. From the very beginning, Xi Jinping has been fighting corruption. And what's that? It's just the local cadres abusing what he said and interpreting it selfishly. So there's this new thing called the patriotic education law. And long story short, it just, instead of listing the rights of citizens, it lists the obligations of citizens. So there's the key difference. And this is not strange, right? This is Confucianism. Always Confucianism emphasized the responsibilities and the obligations of a Chinese citizen. And they're redoubling exhortations from Xi. One of his favorite quotes is, when the going gets tough, we say the tough get going, he says, you got to eat bitterness. And they're putting all this into law so to give people the obligations that they must follow. And they say it's needed to combat foreign influence. So it doesn't, it also extends right into the hearth, right into the home. Parents shall, and love the country and cooperate whenever their children are going on a patriotic field trip, and they refrain from insulting or questioning the government. We're talking totalitarianism here. And as part of this propaganda, they're developed all over the country. They're developing historical sites that inspire patriotism. So we all remember, some of us remember when Carol gave her talk about the town square in Lafayette. That would be a place where you'd learn to love your country and inspire patriotism. Even obscure things like a canal dug through a mountainside has been developed in almost like a theme park. So I'm going to switch gears here. Any comments on developments in China? So those of us who did the great decisions with Ramsey know Bob Kelso. So Bob sent me this yesterday, and I thought it was worth taking a look at a different point of view about what's going on in China. He's of the opinion that China is preparing for war, period. he's written a book. He got on the map, The Logic of War and Peace. It's been published in many different languages, used at war colleges. John le Carre compared him to Machiavelli. And what his argument is, the economic growth in China has taken land out of farming. So there's less arable land per inhabitant, even than India. And this wouldn't make any difference in a peaceful globalized world. You just trade for food. But now with the backpedaling on globalization as nationalism takes over, and we see that starting with Trump, they no longer have that option. So the corollary that you have to understand, going back 25 years, was there were terrible floods of the Yangtze, and the scientists came in and said, hey, this is uncontrolled deforestation. The water's running off the land too quickly because we've deforested. So they planted 90 billion trees. This is the sort of thing China can do. And it actually worked. They built the Great Wall, and so they were able to plant 90 billion trees. And you can, from a satellite, China looks differently. It looks greener, and it had an effect. But it took a lot of land out of being productive fields. They're now growing trees. But now there's the shift of gears to saying, hey, we got to be self-sufficient in foods. And so there, the word went down recently, hey, we got to uproot the trees and start growing crops again. And Ludwig thinks this is crazy, that it's not going to work. And he thinks this is a case of the Great Leap Forward, when Mao Zedong back in the 50s made all kinds of crazy economic plans that led to starvation, where somebody coming in here, Jim Tyson, led to starvation where maybe 10 to 12 million people died. So he thinks that this is what's going on, that it's top-down bad policy, which, by the way, the one-child policy may have been another example of that. We talked about that before. So now they're pulling up trees to plant grain. And Ludwig thinks they're just blindly obeying orders. And he says the only thing it means is they want to be self-sufficient so they can go to war. They've got to start feeding their own animals with self-produced grain, because right now it's the Western Hemisphere that sends them all the grain for their animals, for their pigs, cattle, chickens, and ducks. And so there's all kind of code words that are being used for this. Nobody's saying, hey, we got to grow our own food because we got to be ready and self-sufficient for war. There's he gives example of all the code phrases that Xi Jinping has been using. Nothing surprising, but it's on all means he interprets it as being get ready for war. Yeah, Bob.
I saw what you just said, that Ludwig had said that they were cutting down trees they'd recently planted. So I did a quick search. I can't find any other reference in Google, other than to Lutwak's article about the Chinese cutting down trees, uprooting forests. Oh, and I can find that Chinese 14th five-year plan has a stated target of increasing forest coverage to 24.1% by 2025. And that was from 1 year ago. So I'm just wondering where he got his information on this, you know?
Yeah, and I'm about ready to show you a slide that also kind of challenges the reason that China's agricultural plan may be changing, because we talked about this I think a couple of weeks ago, and I sent Bob Kelso a copy of what we said a couple of weeks ago that gives this another interpretation. So thanks, Bob. I'm kind of on your page. So Lutwak's saying all these peasants that planted trees are upset, and the police are coming in and clubbing to death pigs and ducks. And it's the Great Leap Forward all over again. And before I get to my challenge of Ludwig, I'll just finish his argument. He says there's something irrational going on in the Chinese elite. They're not really ready for war. He says their navy is new. Their air force is dependent on Soviet age jets. Their radar's terrible. They have inferior missiles, and they must know that. But that all this bellicosity is coming from irrational emotional forces that comes from the 150 years of humiliation. He says they could have had Taiwan in their hip pocket if they had treated the citizens of Hong Kong decently and had a true one country, two systems. They could have made it attractive and had one country. But it's more likely Xi Jinping's personal sense of shame, not just from the Japanese in World War II, but also from previous conquests by Turkic tribes, by Genghis Khan, by the Manchurians that set up the Qing dynasty. And Xi is trying to turn his unwarlike people into warriors. And he says, this is what Mussolini did. So this is pretty extreme. We don't have Bob with us, so I've decided to give him equal time, and maybe we can lure him back into debate. For us old timers, we look forward to engaging with Bob over the last 15 years, because he always gave the conservative point of view. So I thought I'd throw that in. Before I get to agricultural policy and another way to look at what's going on, I'll just throw out something that came in yesterday. China's Politburo met yesterday and talked about hidden dangers, and they weren't explicit, but it certainly caught the eye of diplomats around the world. And the Chinese economy is looking shakier and shakier. We've been talking about this. You remember we a couple of months ago we talked about the concept that China had reached peak power, and we're getting more and more evidence of this. China is really in deflation. a place where Japan has been for 20 years. They're just coming out of it. Their real estate bubble is bursting. There are vacant buildings all over the country. Up to 20% of buildings in Nanjing are sitting unsold and unoccupied. And even we were speculating before, but the Politburo is actually admitting that they've got a big problem. The real public menace, though, as pointed out by another observer, is the unemployment. 20% unemployment at 20-somethings, especially if you've been to college, and that this is a threat to stability. Living in their parents' basement, and she has a simple solution for out-of-work young people: eat bitterness again. Eat bitterness. That was a saying of revolutionaries. Remember Xi Jinping's father was a revolutionary. He fell out of favor with Mao and was sent down, as a lot of old communist cadres were, and that Xi Jinping himself grew up in the countryside where his father was being exiled to. But it's not a problem of growing a backbone. You've got some real structural problems. You have highly educated people who can't find high-skilled jobs, and another 11.6 million graduates, college students graduate this summer, and the Chinese population is getting older. People are retiring from blue-collar jobs. There's plenty of blue-collar jobs, but young people don't want blue-collar jobs. So China's got a real problem. It's so bad that some parents are hiring their own kids, and their job titles are full-time children to do housework and talk to their parents. That's the latest. I guess my slides on agriculture are still coming. I promised them, but they're a little bit out of order. So I think we'll get to them. But there was another wild card that's thrown into the geopolitical situation. The question is asked. You know, China and India have been at loggerheads. And we talked before about India possibly joining into what could be considered a NATO style alliance against China in Asia. But that's probably not going to happen. But let's look and see what prompted this question. First of all, a little background. China and India have been fighting over their borders ever since 1967 was their first war. And Carol's very good friend knew a lot about Ladakh. And so we spent a whole episode talking about Ladakh and the border with India, which is 14,000 feet above sea level. Barren land in the Himalayas, but people will fight over possessions, unfortunately, and they have been for decades. Just recently, 2 years ago, as I'll report in just a second. So this is Ladakh, and then there's other places along the border. And so military, there's no comparison. China's military spending has been going up. Now, Ludwig doubts that it's being spent well, but compared to India, they can afford to spend a lot more on the military. The problem for India has been China's had this background of success. They're growing their own weapons, making their own weapons. They're not relying on Russian imports like India is. But you see these border disputes that may be over basically icebound territory, but 20 Indian troops died 3 years ago. Why? Well, China thought India was building roads. And also, they wanted to punish India for sucking up to Trump. You remember Modi came to America, and Dallas had that big love fest with Trump. And they wanted to embarrass India and show that you may be buddy-buddy with America, but they can't help you along our border. So you have these psychological factors against a rapprochement between these two countries. They do have some things in common. They're both nationalistic now, and they both have historical grievances against colonialism and Western imperialism. But they still fight with each other. India gives freedom to the Dalai Lama to live in northern India, but India resents China's growing influence in what they consider their sphere of influence, which is these countries. And we saw it when we were in Laos. So this is what we saw when we were in Laos. They have Hinayana Buddhism, which is different than the Mahayana Buddhism in China and Japan. When we were visiting the small town in the north, they performed the Ramayana, which is a Hindu folktale. It's similar to the Iliad in that it involves a woman who has been kidnapped by enemies of a king. So it's the same story of Helen being kidnapped and taken to Troy, where she's in love with Paris, right? So it's the same story. So it's interesting that both these stories from widely different places involve the insecurity of men with their women. I wonder how often that appears in folklore. But what we learned in Laos is, why are they performing the Ramayana here? And what we learned is that there is a distinct border of the Indian cultural sphere of influence, which we'll call the Indosphere, versus the Sinosphere, which is more Confucian. And it's a mountain range in western Vietnam. It's a real crisp border. The other thing that this explains is Thailand, when they coronate their king, in addition to the Buddhist coronation, they also perform a Hindu Brahmin ceremony. And of course, you would never see that in Vietnam or China. So this is a slide we were working on a couple of weeks ago. The West is very eager for India to join the Quad, which is an attempt to surround China. Ideally, we'd like this to become a NATO. We got Japan, obviously, we got Australia, we got America, and now India has joined the Quad. And so the question is, can you make this Quad stronger? But India resists because they don't want to get involved in any fighting in Taiwan. Japan is obviously eager because North Korea keeps firing missiles over their territory. But India has yet to feel the urgency. But the hope blooms eternal that India would join into a democratic coalition. Now, democratic, I don't know how much that means to India, because they're becoming increasingly autocratic, particularly in the atrocious way that they're treating the Muslims. But India maybe is having second thoughts. They've put all their money on Russia's military, and Russia's military is performing very badly. So Modi recently came to America in pursuit of advanced American weapons. He would be interested in our highly sophisticated drones, and he would like to start manufacturing in India fighter jet engines. He's also approached Apple to try to take over the production of iPhones that has been done in southern China. But he's balking at a formal alliance. India is on their back foot economically. I mean, this just shows China has the favorable trade of balance with India. India so far has been unable to match China at all. This is, Ramsey keeps reminding us that throughout the course of history, it's been India and China that have been the economic powerhouses. And they were right up until the age of colonialism and imperialism. And this dropped off. This graph has been distorted and expanded at the back end to emphasize more what's happened recently. So I'll show that. And you'll see this is not linear, but the same phenomena, India and China. Here's the West, the Industrial Revolution, where Europe takes over. But you can see things are drifting back, perhaps. So India has been increasingly more aggressive with China. They banned 320 Chinese apps. They've started tax raids on Chinese companies. They're harshly reviewing applications for Chinese investments in India. And as I said, they're wooing multinationals to come to India. But unfortunately, they're linked to China in the same way we are. They have a thriving pharmaceutical industry, but they rely on China for the natural resources and products to assemble these drugs. One last thing is geopolitical politics of water. China is damming the upstream rivers. You can see the Himalayas, and you can see all the rivers that start at the highlands of Tibet. And in particular, for India, we see the Brahmaputra River, and China is messing around with the headwaters up there. So this is a source of dispute. India and China both would like better representation on the Security Council. They both reject Western criticism of their human rights. They both share concerns about Islamic extremism. And they both have refused to condemn Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Now, we know about COVID and how their zero tolerance has turned out to be a disaster, but we don't know how big of a disaster. Well, this is interesting. There was a release of information, innocuous appearing, about the number of cremations in the first quarter of 2023 in a province of China. And what they noticed was a 73% jump in cremations from the same quarter a year ago. So they did the calculation and extrapolated and said, you know, the way that they came out of zero COVID too fast with their elderly population unimmunized was irresponsible. And this indicates that maybe in the first quarter, there were 1.6 million excess deaths across China, just in the first quarter. So an interesting possibility. So any questions about China? Comments? Further perspective on Prigozhin and his mutiny. It's become increasingly clear what happened there. Prigozhin was actually using the populist rhetoric of Navalny and talking about thieving elites. But what continues to impress was the failure of the security services. Someone just joined named Aiko. That would be amazing. Hello, Aiko.
Hi.
Oh, hi. You're there from Wyoming. You know,
Wyoming.
I'm gonna get to your slide and tell the folks why you're in Wyoming. I'm going to skip through a few things.
Hello.
Okay, why is Aiko in Wyoming? So, Carol, this is where you come in. Carol took us to a political science conference. How long ago was it, Carol? 5 years ago? And we had read this. We had read this book by Richard Reeves called Infamy, and it was about the relocation camps where Aiko, in fact, was born and where Shigeko was born, who was sitting right beside her. So two of our regular attendees show up, better late than never. And,
We were totally out of Wi-Fi range.
oh yeah, we didn't think you'd be in Wi-Fi range. It's a miracle, and so it's great that we can do the history of why you're there. So Richard Reeves wrote this book called Infamy about the relocation camps, and in one chapter he talked about the Boy Scout troop at Heart Mountain. That's where Aiko and Shigeko are headed, where they were both born. Heart Mountain's right outside of Cody. And so the Boy Scout troops that Richard Reed talks about, in the camp was Norman Mineta, who was a 10-year-old who joined the Boy Scouts. He went on to become a politician out of San Jose, got elected to Congress, and served in Bush's cabinet as the transportation director, W. Bush, as the Minister of Transportation. But in the Boy Scout troop in Cody was this guy. Some of you may recognize him. He's former Senator Alan Simpson. And Alan Simpson was on the panel at this conference in Berkeley that Carol took us to. And we had read the book, and we read how he and Norm Mineta bonded when they did joint maneuvers and joint jamborees together. And Aiko went up and said, I read about you. And he said, why? He said, I was born at Heart Mountain. And he just, his eyes lit up, and he said, well, have you been back to a reunion? And Aiko said, well, no, I haven't. And he said, well, you got to go. So finally, Aiko's going and taking Shigeko with her, and our youngest son, Tim, and our step-grandson, Juan, who is interested in all things Japanese. Why? Because of anime. Anime. So there you have it. Richard Reeves, Infamy. So Aiko and Shigeko, take it away.
We just got to this motel in Gardner, Montana. I guess the Yellowstone National Park goes through Montana and maybe Idaho and Wyoming. And they spotted some elk. I didn't see it, but a lady got eaten by a bear. Not eaten, but mauled by a bear last night in the town that we were in.
Oh, no.
And Timmy didn't tell me about it because he thought I'd freak out. So he's coming. We just checked into our motel, and so we he's unpacking, and he said he'll be right here. But the thing is that we wouldn't have been here if it weren't for the fact that the floods in Wyoming in the winter of 2022 completely destroyed this place that was our last stop for today. It was a river with a geyser in it. And so you could swim in the river and be in cold water and then come to some hot areas because of the geyser. But the flooding last year destroyed it, so it's closed. But we, this is my first time at Yellowstone. My sister had been to Yellowstone before, and Tim has just been showing us all these places and walked us to death. And my knee went out today. That's why we're here early too, as well as that. My knee started hurting. So anyway, we're having a great time checking out the where we were born, and we're hoping to be in Cody Wednesday night, tomorrow night, and then the conference starts Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Tim and Juan are going to be here for just one day. They want to check out the camp, And so, and we're hoping to look up Senator Simpson, but I'm not sure we can and how much time we have also. But anyway, Johnny is sponsoring this trip.
So Aiko, this is Carol. I'm really curious, when you go to the camp, how organized they are, because I've been to Topaz, which is Delta, Utah, and they have a really fantastic set of archives and museums. I've just donated a whole lot of materials to them.
So is that where you were?
Research. I was born after the war, but that's where both sides of my maternal and paternal family were there. So I've been doing research into that. It's really, so I'm really curious how developed these areas are in terms of their research.
Well, apparently Heart Mountain has been going since the 60s, which really shocked me. I couldn't believe that they'd been, and that I knew nothing about this, but they've been doing it for a long time. And they do have an archive, to research. And before I came on this trip, I talked to my 97-year-old uncle.
Oh my goodness.
I know he's still alive and he sounds pretty clear of mind. And he told me, which I didn't know, that the whole side of my father's family went to Tule Lake in California. They transferred there because my grandmother couldn't take the altitude in Wyoming. And so they transferred, but my father and mother had gotten married. And in the camp, they were the first to get married. And so we're bringing their pictures, the original, so that they will put them in the museum.
Fantastic.
And what?
That's so great.
Yeah, I know. They won't believe it that they're in a museum. And so, my uncle said that they stayed, and I suspect they stayed in Wyoming because my mother had a younger brother and she probably didn't want to leave him because he was unmarried. So anyway, we're going to, find out more about our family and find out about the times that they've had. We didn't realize it was so hot in Wyoming in the summertime. It finally cooled down today. It was really hot. And it cooled down today, and then in the winter, it snows so much here. And so extremes of weather, they must have been horribly uncomfortable having come here during, having come from California. I mean, this weather is not a Californian's weather.
Good. We'll have to catch up offline about this. This is really interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see everybody. I'm so glad that we got here in time. You want to say something?
No, it's having a wonderful time. Timmy is a wonderful driver. We could never have done half as much if he wasn't here. So we're really, truly grateful.
Yeah, we would have driven into the lodge after lodge, eating at the lodge, and then gone to the conference. But instead, we've been hiking.
Hey, Aiko, I want you to meet Mackenzie's mother, Jane.
Yes, I see her. Hi.
Hello.
Hello. I hope you're staying at least until after the 31st so that I'll meet you.
Yes, I am. That's great. I'm here for a couple of weeks. It's such a great, friendly neighborhood. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and I've been following the texts, and you sound like you're all partying like there's no tomorrow.
Uh-oh.
That's true.
Well, it is my birthday, so I'm getting
well, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Jane. I did not know that. We'll turn your Aiko's grape cake into birthday cake.
Okay. I look forward to meeting you in person. That'd be great.
And we got
Yes.
special blueberry sauce for you.
Okay.
Okay. And hi to Rudy. I think I saw him a few minutes ago. Did he leave?
Yeah, he's I'm afraid to move because we have finicky connections here, so
Okay.
move it around. But he's
And hi to Bob and David. And I don't see Michael Stein. He's sort of.
I'm here. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You better move into your screen. Yay.
Yay.
Hey, Michael and Janine are feeding me tonight, Aiko.
Oh yeah, I know it. You're not gonna miss me one bit.
Oh, no,
So did you get Cabrillo out of San Diego?
No.
well,
No, he's still there.
I had Homer said he'd be here for the first half, and I moved up his Santa Catalina slides, but he didn't come. So, but I whizzed through them. So technically, yes, we've been in Santa Catalina, but not in any meaningful way. So.
Oh, well, he's taking his time. It's so beautiful down there that he just doesn't want to leave.
I guess. I guess. Well, I'm so delighted you came. You kind of rescued us from the dreary present of geopolitics and China, and although there was a little bit of drama today, but watch on the video, Aiko.
Okay, we're in a news blackout, so I mean, no internet. Yellowstone is totally for the wild animals. Forget about internet.
Well, that's probably a good thing.
Yes, yes, yeah. So nice seeing everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was pleasant.
Well, that was great. I think
Yeah,
that's why I'm here. I get to meet her.
you did. You got.
The politics,
I wasn't. Yeah. You had to sit through an hour of geo.
It was worth it.
Yeah. Okay. Any further questions? I'll stop recording.
Oh, there was a question in the chat.
Okay. To expand, who provides the most reliable information about China? Well, I mean, I've mentioned the podcast Drum Tower. It's a partnership between a Chinese woman who's lived in mainland. Now she's living in Taiwan. She's persona non grata. She did a whole a podcast series on the life of Xi Jinping. So she can't go back to China anymore. But the Economist, longtime editor there, he writes a weekly column called Chagawan, and he gets away with a lot. So I think the Economist is so respected. Get this, the guy who just got fired, Qinggang, he confidentially told somebody that he still subscribes to The Economist, which is interesting. So he wasn't all bad. But I like the Drum Tower. I think the Economist gave China a section of its own starting about 10 years ago. And I read that avidly. I guess foreign affairs, of course. I'll get to Lutvak next week. I don't know what happened to that slide, but we'll the other explanation for their changing agricultural product goal to grow more grain is global warming. And I showed you those slides of the projected grain production as the planet heats up in northern China. So that's the alternative explanation for why they're trying to grow more grain, not to be ready for war, but to be ready for global warming. And those of you who are with us, there are some really good maps showing how the crop distribution is going to change with global warming, and they do have a challenge. I shared with you that they built a 26-story pig farm, that it's all indoors, removed from the vagaries of the heat, which pigs don't do well with. I shared with you the indoor greenhouses that are, and what their goal is for that. And so I think good stuff coming out of the Economist. Does that answer your question, Carol?
Yeah, that's great. And Michael's was even more specific, like who are the experts on the Chinese military spending? Do we know, or is it?
Yeah,
You'll go back to those resources also, or Michael's still here, so he can.
Yeah, I mean, the question, it's nice to show a graph with a line going up, how much they're spending on their military, but I'm not sure China would be freely giving that information out.
And also really specifically, where in the military is it, like, how is that being distributed?
Yeah, I can't vouch for it, but there's very detailed data available that breaks it down. I think there was even a special issue, a special report on China's military. But as with any reporting on military anywhere, it's fraught. So who knows?
And John, by comparison, do we know what the U.S. spends? I mean, you had it going up to 300 billion, but
I think the last time I looked, we spend half again more than China spends.
yeah, something like 500 billion, right?
Yeah.
More than that.
There's 800 billion.
800, yeah.
So it's double 2.5 times.
Yeah.
So just it's,
Yeah, but those are rather nominal numbers, because if you have a million members of the military in each country, it's a lot less money to pay a million Chinese military members than it is the US. So you have to look at percentage of GNP, I guess.
right.
Yeah, I think we're 4%.
Yeah.
We want all of NATO members to be 2%, and only Poland and the Baltic states achieve that. Germany famously falls short, although they swear they're increasing, but they're sure increasing very slowly, because that was Trump's deal, right?
Wasn't it that the U.S. wanted NATO members to do 2% to NATO? That's just a portion of a given country's military output, I would guess.
I don't know.
No, I think that it was the idea, the commitment, which was by 2024 or 2025, that each European member of NATO would spend 2% of their GDP on defense, if that's the way of putting it, in total. Of course, remember, it's all committed to NATO. If for Europe, it's all committed to NATO. Obviously, the United States has some other international obligations, but for European countries, it's a NATO obligation.
Although,
yeah, but Turkey is defending its southern flank. I mean, it gets all jumbled, I think.
Oh, by the way, if you calculate Chinese reported military spending as a percentage of their GDP, Trump would be very disappointed, because it doesn't reach 2%.
Well, I'm going to have to leave.
Right.
I think Macron would like for some percent of military spending to be outside of NATO, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, those French.
Well, adios. I think we.
Okay, bye-bye.